All right, let's look. Matthew 13. We're going to read verse 24 to 30, and then we're going to skip a little bit, and then we're going to go to 36 to 43. It'll make sense why we skip a bit in a second when we read it. I'll give you a second to find it. It's Matthew 13, 24 to 30. It's the first book in the New Testament, so if you go like 2/3-ish of the way into your Bible, you should be about to Matthew, give or take. Pretty good. All right, here we go. Matthew 13, verse 24. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everyone was sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, Do you want us to go pull them up? No, because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let them both grow together until harvest, and at that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then the wheat and bring them to my barn. Then we're going to skip some parables about mustard seeds and yeast. Maybe those will be next week. And then we're going to go here to 36. Then he left the crowd and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and they said, Explain to us this parable of the weeds in the field. And he answered, The one who sowed good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one. An enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out his kingdom, everything that causes sin and all who do evil. And they will throw them into a blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Who's real comfortable right now? Right? That's right, it's Hell Sunday. Welcome, everyone. You didn't think we'd do this so early, but no. We're gonna break this down, because this topic is, it's wild, and there's a lot of unpacking to do in this parable to help it make sense. We're gonna get there. And to give you a little illustration of what I mean when you don't know the whole thing, maybe you're missing some stuff, you can get a wrong picture. My daughter looks exactly like my wife Ashley. If you've seen them walking around, they are literally twins. The pictures of Charlie and the pictures of Ashley when they're the same age are indistinguishable. They're indistinguishable. The only thing that Charlie has of mine is my hair. That's it. And I feel so sorry for her. My hair, you've seen it kind of long. It's wavy to semi-curly the longer it gets, and it's very thick. I have very thick hair. My wife has thin, stick-straight black hair. Charlie has my thick, semi-curly, tangled mess that doesn't want to lay down. And so one of the things we have to do with Charlie at night is we have to brush her hair after a bath, because if you don't, it's even worse the next day and the next day. But she really hates getting her hair brushed because it sticks. You spray all the detangler you want in it, and as you pull, it sticks and it pulls on her hair, and you can imagine a toddler getting their hair brushed screaming bloody murder at the top of her lungs as if we are destroying her scalp. It's just like we're ripping hair out. We're not. We're being as gentle as possible. She cries. She hates it. It's horrible. It's really painful for her, but it has to happen. Are you with me? If you don't brush out her hair, it is a rat's nest, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So if I were to sit in our backyard, make up a story here, and I were brushing her hair, you would hear a toddler screaming bloody murder at the top of her lungs. Ah! No! Stop! You're hurting me! Daddy, no! It hurts so bad! Why are you doing that? Are you with me? You can hear. Now, if you were just walking like on our sidewalk and you heard this girl at the back, 3-year-old, just being like, No, Dad, stop! You're causing me so much pain and hurts. Oh, this is horrible, awful. You would have some impressions of maybe needing to come to the aid of a child in need. You see what I'm saying? But if you came around the corner and you saw me just brushing her hair, you would get a fuller picture of what's really going on. You'd see there's like, I'm not hurting her. I'm trying to help. Are you with me? Okay, good. You got to hear the whole story. Sometimes we hear just the tidbits out of context and we hear it. So do you have ears? Right? Do you have ears? Great. Well, let's hear them. Something because we do with this Bible, and we talked about it the last 2 weeks, is we read it out of context, right? So, for instance, we didn't read the parable that came right before this, the beginning of 13, right? We just started with this one. Yeah? We didn't read the 12 chapters that came before it that sets everything up, right? So a lot of times when we encounter a Jesus teaching, even in our own reading or study, we might just flip open and read one. It's isolated. It's little tidbits, and it's easy to take them completely out of context. So what sounds really harsh and terrifying and horrible, like brushing hair, if you see the whole story, if you can contextualize this teaching that Jesus has in Matthew, you're kind of see a Jesus that has a love and commitment to a good world that's committed to dealing with an evil problem by removing it from the good world in an act of mercy. So you need to be like patient with the Jesus teaching here, just a little bit. The story that Jesus is telling is important because it's an issue of hell. And I really want to just take time to explore that and get a setting where we can sit together and meander our way through this story. Because as soon as I said that word, your mind started writing the story that you already know, this contextual story that the world has set up for us, that culture knows about Christians and what we believe and how it goes. It probably goes something like this. Just tell me, just nod along if you feel like I'm in a ballpark as we go. We live on planet Earth. Hi. Everyone good with that? Great. It's mostly pretty good here. It's mostly pretty good. There's some tragedy, and so, you and I were just living out our days, but it's good here sometimes, and sometimes we do like good things, and most of the time people think Christians believe about this like guilt complex we live with, that we are really horrible as a species and we're not so great, and so Jesus comes in and he tells us, actually you are really great, and if you do something really horrible, that's not great, so we should do more good than bad and believe the right things about Jesus, and then that leads to a good outcome, but if we do more bad than good, and we don't believe the right about Jesus, then we chose poorly, like the guy at the end of Indiana Jones. And the choices play out like this. If you do mostly good, you end up in heaven with like the sparkly pearly gates and the clouds and the flying angels as such. And if you do more bad than good, you end up in this disembodied pit underground somewhere near the Earth's core where you're like eternally damned and burned or something. Am I somewhat close? That when I say that, this narrative starts to play in your head? Nods? Great. If you have incorrect beliefs about Jesus, right? Okay, I said that. Good, great. It's not like I have problems with that story by myself. I do. I have tons of problems with that narrative. But I think the more important thing is that the Bible has tons of problems with that exact storyline. Are you with me? We have a bad picture in our brain. Jesus has a bad picture about this. This is the equivalent of hearing my daughter screaming on the back porch and getting the wrong picture of what's really going on. Okay? In the book of Matthew, on any given day, if you just flipped around to Matthew, you would hear Jesus talking about this word called kingdom. Say kingdom. He says this quite often. The entire narrative of Matthew is centered around this idea of the kingdom of heaven. So if you look in Matthew 4, just flip back a couple pages, in 17. From that time, Jesus began to preach, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." How about that? There's the summation of all of Matthew. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near in the presence and embodied spirit of Jesus right here in this moment. That's the good news Matthew's telling us. That the gospel is the good news, the kingdom of heaven is here. And according to Jesus in Matthew, heaven is first and foremost not an endgame destination, because he says the kingdom of heaven is here. It's some sort of reality that we're in right now as Jesus walked on the earth in that teaching. Does that make sense? He didn't say the kingdom of heaven is somewhere over there in a long time away, but he says, no, it's here with me. So think about the very first sentence of the Bible. We're going to have to unpack a little bit of context in order to get to this. But the very first sentence of the Bible, Genesis 1:1. For in the beginning, God created It's not in the beginning God made the heavens and underneath the earth. What? Good, thank you. Well, great. You can be confident. Say good, strong answers. But in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. So the story of the Bible begins with heaven and earth as these co-opted together spaces that are the counterparts to each other. There's the heaven and the earth, and they sort of are together. There's God space and human space. And in the Garden of Eden, it's like one space. Are you with me? So the Garden of Eden is like the heaven and earth co-mingling together. That's how the Bible starts. So imagine Eden is the place where God is in the good of creation and all of earth, where humans dwell in harmony and peace together and so on and so forth, and it's all really good. Heaven is married to earth. It's like all how the Bible begins. And it makes it for like, in my Bible it's like 5 pages because I have a lot of notes. In most Bibles it lasts for like maybe less than a page. And then tragedy strikes. So we have in chapter 3 of Genesis, humanity is basically, they seize autonomy from God. They say, I want to be able to define what I think is right and wrong. That's essentially what it is. I want to make the definitions for myself. I don't want to be ruled, I want to rule. So they want to define this good and evil for themselves instead of trusting this definition that they have. And so they bite the apple and they realize all this stuff's weird, and heaven and earth, the space, pulls apart slightly, and with just a tiny little overlap on this space. So now we have these 2 circles. Are you with me with this separation suddenly? So God, though, has this dignity of humanity because he created us in his image. And so God allows humans to continue to live on earth and pushes heaven out ever so slightly. And so now we operate in this world where we have this overlap of some heaven space with earth. We still haven't mentioned hell yet, have we? Anywhere in any of this. It's not like God pushed heaven out and he's like, now you actually go over there. No, we still are operating in this space. We have this independence that we claimed in the start of Genesis, this knowledge to rule and create our own definitions. And so Genesis 3 through 11 tells the story of humans continually bringing ruin and evil into God's world. It's like never ending. You've got Cain and Abel, you've got the Tower of Babel, you've got all the stuff leading up to Noah. But it begins with heaven and earth, which means, this is where we're going to get into some cool. Whatever hell is, ready? Whatever it is, it doesn't have any place that exists in God's world. Okay, say it with me. Whatever it is, it doesn't exist in here. Not in creation. You see, it's heaven and earth, and he pushed heaven out slightly. Still didn't create it. You with me? Stay with me here. Hell and sin and evil and its consequences are something that come in later in this story as a continued corruption and distortion of the reality that we existed in after heaven moved out. Hell is something that God didn't want for the world. He didn't create it in the beginning. Humans are the one that unleashed it into the world. We bit the apple, and through the continual garbage that we spew and do over and over, we continue to make this. It's going to sound like I'm making it up, but this is Jesus' point of view. In the teachings here of Jesus, you're going to see right now that hell is not some future reality. Because remember, heaven is here and now in Jesus. It's not some future destination. But he describes hell in the same way, okay? Matthew 23. Turn to it. We're going to stay in Matthew because that's Matthew's book, and he's the one telling us these teachings here. So Matthew 23. Jesus is giving a long, it's called the Woes to Religious Leaders. And he's pronouncing to a bunch of religious leaders in Jerusalem their woes, their woe to you who whatever, like, hey, slow down, buckaroo. Matthew 23. You with me? Yeah? Okay. So he says this to them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must be careful to do everything that they tell you, but do not do what they do. For they don't practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They place the honor at the banquets, the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and be called rabbi by one another. I'm too far, sorry, 13. I've just enjoyed reading this. We're going to skip to 13. This is where I actually wanted to be. Woe to you, teachers of the laws and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those who are trying to. Woe to you, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, but when you've succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Interesting. Woe to you, the hypocrites! You make one convert, but in the end you make them twice the creature of hell that you ever were. In Jesus' mind, hell is not some endgame future thing, but because it doesn't make sense with how he's describing these Pharisees. He's not like, hey, Pharisees, in the future, by the way, one of these people is going to be like way down there and he's going to live in this space. No, he says, you've made them that in the here and the now. Do you hear this difference? He's calling them hypocrite, which is when people act with religious pride, but they do things differently. And Jesus says they're creating and unleashing hell when they do these things. When you act religiously superior and you create this other thing, you're unleashing hell on this world. And so he uses hell to describe this. For Jesus, it's not some religious thing in the future. It's something that prideful religious people create, and it's unleashed into the perfection of the world. Matthew's followers. Jesus' followers will pick up on this. In James 3, it talks about how the tongue is a vehicle to unleash hell on people, like through your gossip and the way that you speak. So think about this. Think of how great you can make somebody feel by using words. Like I could look at my wife and be like, "You are so beautiful today." That would just like pick up her spirit, wouldn't it? Just like think of like the nicest stuff people say to you, and just how like uplifting and spirit filled and great that is. Just imagine one of those in your moment. It's the best thing anyone's ever said to you. Great. Now imagine the worst, because I could also use the same mouth and tell Ashley, you know, you really are a terrible mother. When we say things like that with our words, James says what we're doing is we're creating and unleashing hell in God's good world. He picks up on this stuff that Jesus talks about, and he brings it more into practical when he writes the book later. So Jesus and James see this as something that we've unleashed here in God's good world. It's our selfishness, our evil, the consequences of the things that we've created and pushed forth into God's world. That's the bad news. Okay? Every sermon has bad news. If there's no bad news, there's no good news to follow it. So here's the good news. We're going to actually talk about the good news now. We've settled in some bad news. Good. According to Jesus, the kingdom of heaven is come in the person of Jesus here and now, and the whole mission that he has is to confront this hell and to kick it out of creation completely. This is your motion for the day. He's going to kick it out. Just give me a kick. Great. Well, come on, like you're a soccer star somewhere. Great, perfect. That's the story, right? This is this context to fully give you a little more appreciation for this parable. My daughter is screaming, hell, all these things, but let's hear the whole story come in here. Because when you get that whole context, here's the thing. Whatever hell is, whatever this creation, whatever this disaster is, it fits into a story of God's mercy. I'm going to get there. Because God could just have walked away and then let us unleash this forever and ever on ourselves for eternity with no way to get rid of it. But in God's mercy, he doesn't allow human evil to go unchecked. And he'll deal with it here and now, and he deals with it by telling this parable to describe what's happening right now. This parable. We're going to go back to it. It's a story about a farmer sowing seeds. The farmer's trying to grow wheat. And the people, they throw the seeds out and they fall asleep, and everybody wakes up in the morning and they look out in this wheat field and it's full of weeds. There's two big questions that the people who work on the farm ask the guy who owns this farm in this parable. Two big ones that Jesus kind of brings up that we're going to unpack. The first one we're going to look at here is, where did the weeds come from? Like, why are there weeds here? The parable is a commentary, right, on this good news of the kingdom of heaven invading earth. So Jesus has come onto the scene, and he's announcing the kingdom of heaven is here, and he's the Messiah, and he's healing, and he's confronting evil, and then all of a sudden, opposition arises against Jesus. This is this context we're getting in. The very people that Jesus is sent to bring this kingdom to are stewing rebellion against him, and they're opposing him, and a group of them have actually started to put in motion a plan to murder him. John the Baptist, Jesus' own family, right? They're, hey, why don't you come home, Jesus? You're kind of embarrassing me a little bit. John, are you really who I'm waiting for? Because it doesn't seem like you're supposed to do what you're going to be doing. They don't get behind him fully. There's opposition to his mission. Those are weeds. Are you with me? So where did all these weeds come from, Jesus? If you're really the Messiah and the kingdom is coming with you, then why are there weeds? Right, this farmer who scattered the seeds. Did you buy cheap wheat? That you didn't check to make sure it wasn't tainted with a bunch of weeds before you threw it out? Do you not care there's weeds growing in your farm? The farmer's response to this question, an enemy did this. An enemy did this. So Jesus in this parable, he's laying into the Pharisees But ultimately, he doesn't see the people who are plotting to murder him as the real enemy. Do you see that? Because the weeds are the opposition, but who put them there? Right? An enemy, something else. Jesus doesn't see the Romans as the enemy. He doesn't see the people plotting his murder as the real enemy. He's pointing to something much darker and behind the scenes that's fomenting these weeds that's been unleashed in God's world. And it goes right back to the very first page of the Bible, where you have humans influenced by a spiritual evil. See, they come to believe a different story about God's character, Adam and Eve, in the beginning, as if God's holding out on them. Hey, if you eat this, you could define what's good and evil. God's holding out on you on what's really there. It'll be better for you if you become like God and you do this. And so Jesus sees an enemy at the root of all of this, even present in the garden. And it's humans that fully chose to embrace and do this evil and unleash this hell in God's good world. And so evil is so foreign in God's good world, it's this intruder that shouldn't be there. It's a weed growing where it shouldn't be. Think about this. If you, think about a time you knew you were going to do something and it was going to hurt someone. Like you were like, this is just going to bring me so much joy to just tear this person's life apart right now. I'm going to tell them how ugly this painting is or how terrible of a job because I need to pick myself up. Are you with me? You know the exact thing I'm thinking of, where you just are like, I know I'm going to say this and it's going to ruin their life or it's going to hurt them today, but it's going to feel so good when I say it. Are you with me? You got the story in your mind? And then about a week later, maybe a couple days, an hour, minute, 2 later, and it's been said. And sometimes in that moment, the word leaves your mouth and you go like this to try to grab it and shove it back in so you don't say it. Do you know this feeling? It's this intrusion, right? You're not made to do evil. Are you with me? You're not meant to do that. That instant regret, that feeling like, I should never have done that. Do you know this sense later after you do it and you go, wow, it wasn't even me. I'm not like that. You with me? Evil is this real intruder into God's world and into our lives. And Jesus is going to kick it out. Come on, kick it out. Here we go. That's the good news. He's going to kick it out. An enemy did this. That's the response. An enemy did this. The second question, do you want us to go pull up the weeds? That's a good question. If you had a garden, my wife and I have a little garden in our backyard. We weed it every 5 minutes, I think, and there's new weeds every 10 seconds we go out there. Should we go out and pull up the weeds? And you think you know the answer. The farmer, he should say, yes, right? Yeah, who wants weeds in my garden? But it's not what he says. He says, no. No, that's a bad idea. Because when you're pulling up weeds, what you think is a weed is actually wheat. And what you think is wheat is actually a weed. So we're going to let them both grow together. Jesus makes an assumption that the workers are poor evaluators of wheat and weed. And we think of ourselves as being really quite discerning about people's character. I know for 100% that person is a follower of Jesus, and I know that person definitely is not. I'm pointing at just an empty chair. No one over there in particular, right? I know for sure this person A is and this person B isn't. But Jesus in this parable says, stop. Stop. Don't. If you go around declaring and dealing out Jesus' justice and judgment on people that you think are weeds, it's just as horrible and it's going to result in disaster. Can you try to imagine what would happen if let's just say Christianity as a whole and the church took it upon itself to be the responsibility and the Jesus police, to punish people who aren't followers of Jesus, and so you can work really hard and try to imagine a church like that thinks they're like the Jesus police, and you don't have to think very hard. You don't really have to think very hard. In Jesus' mind, a bit of a betrayal is overstepping our bounds of being followers to thinking we are Jesus. There's a little detail in this parable that helps it make sense. So we have wheat and weeds. I'm going to put a picture up here. Now the wheat and the weeds, it's a weed called dunya. Say dunya. And it's common in Middle East and it grows in fields and it's a weed. One of these pictures is wheat and the other one is a dunya weed. So which one's which? Anybody got a stab? Which one? Which one? That one over there? This one's the wheat. That's the dunya. I tried to find a good picture that, right here. They're a little fuzzy, but do you see how, boy, those are really similar. Real similar. And you can only tell the difference when it's literally time for harvest. The wheat one, the stalks go and they have like the leaves like fold down, and the dunya ones never fold back down at harvest. And that's like the only way to know once they're like intertwined. It looks exactly like wheat in the early phases. It's not obvious what's wheat. It's not obvious what's weed. And so Jesus here is like, I don't trust disciples to be good, constant evaluators of whether something's a weed or wheat, or if someone is good or bad. Because humanity is harder than a weed or a wheat. This is a wheat, this is a weed, or whichever direction. I don't even know anymore, right? It's binary, it's one or the other. But the humanity is a little more complicated. 100% evil, 100% good. It's a mixed bag in most people. But we have a tendency to maximize the flaws and the good in people and minimize the opposite. So if someone's bad, they're so bad. But you're really big and we'll elevate all the really good. We maximize and minimize to make people binary. Are you with me? Well, of course I am wheat, and of course they're weed. I know that for sure. There's actually a word for religious pride that maximizes the flaws of other people and minimizes my own flaws, and it's called hypocrisy. Which, if I remember right, Jesus said was unleashing hell and destroying everything. Stop. Stop it. Stop. Seriously, stop. That's what he said. Don't pick it. Stop. Jesus says you have one job, and it's the job the farmer hired you to do. Grow wheat. That's what you were put. Grow the wheat. The weeds, just grow the wheat. What's the job of Jesus' followers? What is his response to this hell unleashed on earth? He says it's the Son of Man who sows the seed. Jesus' response to this unleashed hell on this good world is to sow seeds of good news. That despite everything that's done to ourselves in God's good world, that God hasn't rejected us, but rather in the person of Jesus, he came along fully human to actually be the kind of human being, this hell-free human being that we were all made and called to be. And in Jesus' death, we see the Creator is actually allowing this unleashed evil fully on himself to overwhelm him. And he takes the consequences of that all the way to his own destruction and death. Jesus knows that the mixed nature of the human heart and how it's hard to distinguish weeds and wheat, and this good and the evil in this parable to make a point about judgment. But there's a whole context for this last little bit that has to come through to make this work. If Jesus knows that the whole heart is a mixed reality of this good and this evil, and he's really serious about getting rid of hell, right? He's more serious than we are about it. Let's think about this for a second. Think of something we in this room all could agree on, that even your neighbor who doesn't know a thing about Jesus, he doesn't care, it's whatever, but even this person could agree on is so evil, so hellish, so beyond anything, it has to be removed from this world. It has absolutely zero place at all. Just like could we all agree, and even your neighbor, that killing someone is wrong? It has no place in this world. Good? Okay, good. All right. Jesus agrees. Congrats. Yay. But if you go earlier in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about this. He agrees. It needs to stop. It should be removed from God's world. But he takes it more seriously than we do. Because we would be content if we got rid of murder. If we were like, no more murder. I've put my foot down. We all agree. This is great. But he says, I'm not going to be satisfied. The law isn't fulfilled. This world isn't made better until anger in the heart is removed entirely. He's more serious than we are. We're like, as long as we're not murdering people, we're doing a great job. He's like, no. If you're angry, it's basically the same thing. It's more serious. We want to prune branches. We're really good at pruning. We see it and we're like, snip, snip, so much better. That weed is smaller. But Jesus uproots the whole thing and kicks it out. It's way more serious than what we want to do. Because it's a mixed bag of our character. And so that's this paradox of this good news that we talked about with this No God sermon a long time ago. Like, it's good news. Heaven is invading earth. What a great thing. That's so exciting. it's going to invade my life, and it's going to change the way I live, and I'm going to be a different person, and then I'm going to be subordinate to other things, and then it's kind of scary, isn't it? It's like what happened to me is going to change and be molded to be more like this. What do I have to let go of? Right? This back and forth. Imagine a surgeon just like rips a scalpel out and starts running at you with it. Like, is it good or bad? Like, as a surgeon, I trust doctors. Are you with me? Like, if I just like whipped out a knife and I had a scrub on and a mask and like I was scrubbed in for surgery and I was like, shing, come on over here, Adam. I'm going to cut that organ out of you. Frightening, correct? But maybe it's a good thing, right? We'll get there. The good news is that the kingdom of heaven is here, and he wants to get the hell out of here. He's going to kick it out. And so he's lived, he's died, he was raised for you and me, and I can be converted into wheat so that I don't go around saying things like, oh, you're definitely still a weed. But the parable doesn't end there. Jesus explains this parable, and the way that he explains it is that this is where we get real mixed up. We go, okay, so there's like a password or something we got to figure out so at the end of the age, I'm not bundled into wheat and thrown into the fire. I got to figure out the password. I got to know what the thing is. That's not the whole story. God's on a mission to heal the good world and to remove, he's going to kick the hell, he's going to kick it all out, he's going to uproot the weeds, and that's challenging news to hear. So then how does hell play into this whole story? Because of course the story of the Bible ends in reversing this direction of heaven and reuniting with earth. So the very last page of the Bible, there's this wedding, and it's heaven and earth merging back together in this new city of Jerusalem, and the Garden of Eden is recreated. And then in the very, very last page of the Bible, something happens with hell, and it is pushed outside of this city. Okay, are you with me? So we get this remerging here, and New Eden, and like there's walls and things, and on the outside of it, over there, is now hell. That's how the Bible ends. So we remerge back to the garden, and hell is pushed outside of the city. And Jesus in this parable here talks about angels and furnaces and gnashing teeth and people shining like the sun. Every single image of Jesus' explanation is drawn from the book of Daniel. So Daniel is a very apocalyptic literature. It's very metaphorical. You have angels in the furnace, people shining like the sun. And so he's explaining the end of this parable using this language of Daniel that's got dragons and beasts and things in it. But the end of the book in Daniel tells you all these things are symbols, common ways that Jewish authors wrote imagery to help it kind of make sense and feel more real. And there's two statements that Jesus makes about this in Matthew. In Matthew 8, he describes that they'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth in the utter darkness. And then at Matthew 13, he says he'll throw them into a furnace of fire, and they'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So which is it? Is it going to be a pit of utter darkness or a bright, fiery furnace? Can those coexist? Have you ever stood next to a fire and been like, it is really pitch black in this fire? That's supposed to be funny. Didn't work. Are you with me? How can they both be true? Can you be in a fire that is also pitch black? No? Okay, great. All right, good. We're live. Great. If Jesus was using literal language, right, you couldn't have both. There's something figurative, there's something metaphorical happening here. And people get scared when I say the Bible has a metaphor in it, because we go, metaphors, ooh, that's not real. I don't like that. How do I know it's real now if it's a metaphor? But here we go. My wife is a firecracker. That's a metaphor. Does it mean that my wife is a black cat firecracker that I can light the wick off and it'll blow? Or does it tell you something that's about her? Metaphors are more real in my mind than anything else. It's ways to describe stuff way beyond our ability, right? The sun is like a hug. It's not really a hug. I don't know. I'm terrible at metaphors on the fly, apparently. That's a simile, actually. I'm terrible at them on the fly. But it doesn't make it not real. Like, my wife is still over there. Like, she didn't turn into a firecracker because I said my wife is a firecracker. Ashley? I heard her talk. Good, she's not a firecracker. It encapsulates something beyond. It's a language to capture things that are really hard to describe. So Jesus is describing this with metaphors, this very powerful language to give us a window into something. A place that is so dark and lonely and isolated. It's dark. It's alone. It's separation. It's this refusal to acknowledge God's authority over you and that you want to continue to be God like the humanity decided so long ago and to find good and evil for yourself, so much so that you would rather be completely isolated and alone than in that presence. And this image of this fiery furnace, right? This evil has this corrosive effect that breaks down until things are no longer recognizable for what it once was. You throw a marshmallow in a fire, in 10 minutes it ain't even looking like marshmallow anymore. It's destructive. You with me? This loss, this anger, this sin that breaks us down, it dehumanizes, it makes us what we weren't before. Why would anyone choose that? Why wouldn't everyone want to just not participate in that? But you have to remember that hell isn't an end game. Remember how we started with this. It's not an end game. Heaven's not there, late, far away. It's something Jesus is bringing here and now, and that hell is something that's happening here and now through the words of our mouth. We choose it all the time. We love it. we love it. You choose to gossip about coworkers, the way you view yourself as better than other people because of some religious belief. We love it. We choose it all the time. C.S. Lewis said it's a monument of God's honoring of human dignity that he left us with a decision. If humans refuse to be healed, if I refuse to let the surgeon who's running at me with a scalpel cut out the diseased and dying organ from me, then God will let me live. But he won't allow me to do it inside of a good world anymore. The good news is that he's going to remove it so it can no longer destroy the good world or others. And we have all these questions. We have all these questions about this, like, what about this and that and this? What about, Jesus? No, stop. No. That's not your job. Grow wheat. That's your job. Grow the wheat. Jesus has lived for me, he's died for me, and he's been raised for me. And when he looks at me and I receive him, he looks at me and he sees me in my life and what he's done for me, and the only way I could possibly make it is that I need to become the greatest servant of the most humble person who can just share good news about Jesus and let Jesus sort out everything else. Grow wheat. Stop. Grow the wheat. Grow the wheat.